What is life and when does it begin? Logic leads to an astonishing answer. Written and read by Bernhard Kutzler. The question of the beginning of life is often discussed ideologically today. There are two groups. Some say life begins at conception. Others say it begins at birth. In the following, I will guide you through 3 thought experiments that provide a surprising answer. A cell is the smallest unit of life. Reproduction is one of the elementary behaviors of life. Imagine a cell X multiplying by division. Throughout the process, it remains one cell, until the moment of physical separation when it becomes 2 cells, X1 and X2. Which of the following statements is true? First, X died and X1 and X2 were born. Second, X lives on as X1 and X2 was born. Third, X lives on as X2 and X1 was born. Fourth, X lives on as both X1 and X2. If the first statement is true, that is, X died and X1 and X2 were born, X would have committed suicide by dividing. This contradicts the principle of life, and it would be absurd to choose the moment of separation as the death of X and the birth of X1 and X2. Any other time would also be absurd. If the second statement is true, why not the third? Or vice versa. It would be arbitrary and, therefore, absurd to regard X1 or X2 as the continuation of X and the other cell as the child. Under unfavorable environmental conditions, an amoeba performs a multiple division that could produce hundreds of new cells. Here, determining which cell X lives on as would be even more absurd. Therefore, the logical answer is that cell X lives on as both X1 and X2. X has 2 bodies after division. A cell reproduces by creating more and more bodies of or for itself. This is a very effective survival strategy because the cell survives even if some of its bodies are destroyed. Next, we look at sexual reproduction. This involves the fusion of 2 cells, such as an egg and a sperm cell. When 2 cells X and Y fuse, they form a cell XY. Which of the following statements is true? First, X and Y died and XY was born. Second, X lives on in XY and Y has died. Third, Y lives on in XY and X has died. Fourth, both X and Y live on as XY. Every variant in which something dies contradicts the principle of life. Therefore, the fourth statement is true. X and Y both live on as XY. After a division, a cell has 2 bodies. After a fusion, 2 cells have 1 body. These considerations can be applied to multicellular life forms such as plants, animals, and humans. See my book, Consciousness, Its Nature, Purpose and How to Use It, for details. The logic is crystal clear. Life is something other than bodies. Life is a phenomenon that expresses itself through bodies. Life does not die. Bodies die. Computers are a good analogy. They comprise hardware and software. Software can express itself through hardware. Some software runs on millions of pieces of hardware. Software does not die, hardware dies. Are bodies hardware and is life software? No, it's not that simple. Software is a manifestation of know-how, the knowing of how to do something. For example, if I know how to solve a quadratic equation, I could write software that does it. This software would be a manifestation of my know-how. Hardware is also a manifestation of know-how, the knowing of how to construct something so that it fulfills a certain function. A car, for example, is a manifestation of the knowing of how to construct a self-moving device, an automobile. Life forms are also manifestations of know-how, the knowing of how to survive. The body of a life form is a hardware of life. Its behavioral programs are a software of life. Let's do a third thought experiment. For this, we travel back in time and observe the first cell in the history of planet Earth. We call it Sally. Sally reproduces by dividing. After the first division, Sally has 2 bodies. Each body goes its own way and continues to reproduce. Soon, Sally has 4 bodies, then 8, then 16. Let's assume each body divides once a day. After 10 days, Sally could have had 1024 bodies. But there are slightly fewer, because some bodies were destroyed. They ended up in environments where they could not survive. After another 10 days, Sally has about 100,000 bodies. Another elementary behavior of life is what is usually called adaptation of behavioral programs to the environment. Therefore, the 100,000 bodies of Sally, living in 100,000 different environments, have different behavioral programs. Each body behaves in a way that suits its environment. After another 10 days, Sally has about 5 million bodies. Again, some bodies had died because they ended up in hostile environments. Others have died because the bodies use each other as food and therefore as a source of energy. Sally is its own food. One day, one of Sally's bodies divides as usual, but the 2 new bodies stay together and live as a team. They are the first multicellular life form. It too is a body of Sally. After billions of years, Sally reaches the diversity of life on this planet as cells, plants, animals, and humans, and all are bodies of Sally. Sally began a few billion years ago with 1 body and 1 behavioral program. Together, they were a manifestation of the survival know-how of that time. This know-how grew through the experiences of Sally's countless bodies. Each body had its own life story, and each enriched the know-how of survival. So what is life? Life is a powerful, constantly growing know-how, the know-how of survival. It expresses itself through bodies. Life is neither born nor does it die. Bodies are born and die. Where is this know-how and therefore life? Know-how is made of the same fabric thoughts are made of. This fabric is pure information and not part of the physical universe. I describe it in my book on consciousness and in my article, There is More Than Just the Universe. So the answer to the question, when does life begin, is life began on this planet a few billion years ago. We observe the coming and going of bodies, each of which is one of billions and billions of aspects of this one global life. If you continue this train of thought, you realize that the entire universe is one gigantic form of life. Everything in the universe is an aspect of this one universal life. In my article, Intuition is much more than just a sixth sense, I describe an insight about life that supports and complements the perspective presented here. Finally, here are 2 exercises. Exercise 1. Reflect on the fact that life is independent of bodies and that you are an expression of life, one of many. Consider what this insight means for your interactions with your environment. Exercise 2. Reflect on the fact that you are both your mother and your father, and that you are all your children. Since your children are their children, you are also your grandchildren. And since each of your parents are or were their parents, you are also your 4 grandparents.